Joseph Mallord William Turner was hailed as a prodigy from an early age, and he went on to have a remarkably successful painting career.
He was incredibly well known during his lifetime and enjoyed a huge amount of success, but even some of his patrons were quite confused by what came up later.
These experimental works would prove highly controversial amongst his contemporaries.
Turner's work changed a lot during his lifetime. He wasn't just content to keep doing the same thing.
He was derided for making terrible work with all sorts of unknown mixtures.
His work started off rather realistic and then became more and more expressionist, almost abstract. To many critics, this was a step backwards. They couldn't understand what he was doing.
However, Turner's later dramatic paintings would be adored by the Impressionists and people who see them today.
The Impressionists really looked back at his works as being pioneering.
Turner probably was the most revolutionary British artist of the 19th century.
He becomes this extraordinary figure, revered, if you like, by those who understood his work, damned and dismissed by others.
There are still many mysteries about Turner's life and even the fate of some of his works. Two of his paintings were stolen in Frankfurt in 1994, and only a strange sequence of events managed to bring them back where they belong. In 1843, when Turner was 68 years old, he exhibited a painting called Light and Colour, along with its companion piece, Shade and Darkness. They encapsulated the much more radical style that Turner had embraced in the latter stages of his career, and showed the inspiration he had taken from the theory of colours by Goethe. But a century and a half after these revolutionary works were first seen, they would vanish from a temporary exhibition in Frankfurt.
There was an exhibition in Frankfurt on Goethe's interest in colour and art, and the Tate Gallery lent two paintings by Turner, major works, which reflected Goethe's colour theory.
These are two late Turner paintings from the period in his life when he was making these rather amazing kind of proto-impressionist pieces, but they're also allegorical, biblical themes, but they're also an argument about Goethe. And because of that, they'd been chosen to be part of an exhibition in Frankfurt.
These two wonderful paintings were stolen along with one Caspar David Friedrich painting, which I think is sort of quite interesting.
The robbers stayed behind and took the paintings during the night.
I was director of programs at the Tate, and my boss was the director, Nicholas Sirota. And he rang me early in the morning, woke up and took this call, and it was very hard to take in what he was saying, which was that a message had come through, that these two Turner paintings had been stolen in the night. And it was really hard to know almost what Nick was saying. It was such an appalling message, but he finished that call by saying, "You better bring your passport to work."
It would be years before these Turners would be seen by the public again. Tremendous efforts would be made to try and reclaim these key elements of Turner's artistic legacy, a legacy that took a long time to be fully appreciated.
To select, combine, and concentrate that which is beautiful in nature and admirable in art is as much the business of the landscape painter in his line as in the other departments of art.
Turner was born in Covent Garden, London in 1775. The exact date is still unknown, but there's a record of his baptism on the 14th of May. Although he had the first name of Joseph, he went by his middle name of William throughout his life.
Turner is born in very, very modest circumstances. You know, he's the son of a barber, grows up in Covent Garden.
Turner started drawing at a really young age. We know that in 1786 he went to Margate and he made some sketches of the town. He was really, from very small boy, out and about making drawings from life. And later on he went to go and visit an uncle in Berkshire in a place called Sunningwell. And we have a whole sketchbook that exists from that time and a watercolour of Oxford. So his father was immensely proud of him from a very early age.
When Turner was 12 years old, his father put some of his drawings in the window of his barber's shop and they sold.
We know that he bragged to an artist friend saying, you know, my son is going to be this amazing painter. He's going to be an incredible painter. So he was drawing and sketching from childhood, really, and then went on into the academy from 1789.
The Royal Academy had only recently been established and was still headed by its very first president, Sir Joshua Reynolds, one of Turner's artistic heroes. Reynolds himself would head the panel that admitted the precocious young Turner to the school.
Turner entered the school of the Royal Academy at the age of 14, which was very young, and he was a very good student. His education now would have been rather traditional. A lot of drawing of the human body, either from live models or from plaster casts.
What we do know is that he did a lot of topographical drawing on the side, so he was to sort of support himself financially. He recognised this need for topographical drawings and then was in the academy. He first of all started working in the plaster galleries and then moved on.
There's one extant self-portrait from his period as a young man there, and he was very able. He was just a star pupil, I think, from the beginning.
Turner exhibited his first oil painting whilst at the Royal Academy, Fisherman at Sea, which shows a nocturnal scene on the English south coast. But Turner had high ambitions and travelled across Europe to learn from the great masters at the best collections, including the Louvre. He was able to achieve his dreams thanks in part to the support of Walter Fawkes.
Walter Fawkes was a Yorkshire landowner who lived near Leeds in Wharfdale, and he spotted Turner's abilities early. And when Turner was 22, he commissioned him to do a series of watercolours of his estate.
Fawkes was an early patron, somebody who believed in his talent and who was giving him money and buying things off him, which if you're a young student just out of college is enormously exciting.
Walter Fawkes' home became almost a second home for Turner. He spent a huge amount of time there. Fawkes became really a strong patron and supporter, but also just a really good friend. It made somewhere for him to go outside of London.
Turner's career went from strength to strength, and he became one of the most celebrated artists of his era. But despite his fame, we know little about his personal life. He never married, but he may have had 2 daughters with a widow named Sarah Danby.
I hate married men. They never make any sacrifices to the arts, but are always thinking of their duties to their wives or families or some rubbish of that sort.
Later in his career, Turner started to lose the critical praise he'd become accustomed to with works such as The Fighting Temeraire, first exhibited in 1839. His paintings began to lose a focus on specific details, and his mature style, seen in Snowstorm and Rain, Steam and Speed, would instead highlight dramatic scenes of shimmering light. Critics were not impressed.
His work started off rather realistic and then became more and more expressionist, or some of them in the later years almost abstract. And of course, to many critics, this was a step backwards. They couldn't understand what he was doing.
When they were first exhibited, they were regarded absolutely as sort of strange and very, very odd by some of the critics. I mean, they were sort of really dismissed by some as saw them as far too experimental.
He took a lot of flack, and these are people who maybe supported him in his earlier career. He was incredibly well known during his lifetime and enjoyed a huge amount of success, but even some of his patrons were quite confused by what came up later.
The critics were incredibly rude.
There are some criticisms saying that they looked like lobster salad, mustard, whitewash, soap suds. So I think they were just quite bemused by these seemingly unfinished, quite mad, riotous paintings that were very different from what they're used to.
I mean, they got wonderful kind of swirls of colour, but of course those things that were dismissed in Turner's time have later been reappraised as great masterpieces.
Turner would persevere with his radical style and made the pioneering decision to leave his works to the British nation. But this remarkable collection would suddenly be incomplete thanks to a theft in Frankfurt in 1994. But efforts were being made to make the collection whole once again.
It is only when we are no longer fearful that we begin to create.
Joseph Mallord William Turner died on the 19th of December 1851. He was buried, as he'd requested, at St. Paul's Cathedral next to his hero, Sir Joshua Reynolds. In an unconventional move for the time, his large collection of finished paintings still in his possession were bequeathed to the British nation.
He left his paintings and drawings to the state, which was an unusual thing to do, and it was a huge amount of material. There were 300 oil paintings and 30,000 drawings and watercolors.
Turner left a lot of money, a small fortune really. He left some money to the Royal Academy, who have since given the Turner Medal, and also to the National Gallery, which took the large bulk of his paintings, which we now know are in the Tate, in the Claw Wing.
There have been occasions through 18th, 19th, and certainly in 20th century when artists have done wonderful things of donating works. But Turner was determined not just to kind of leave a few paintings, but to really leave the very best.
We were lucky to have this bequest, but he also wanted to make sure that his life's work was going to be looked after, was going to be kept together, and that people could learn from it and see what a great artist he was. I mean, I think he was very interested in that whole idea of being somebody who had been breaking new ground.
I think to leave that body of work, his entirety of his career, to the state was really something special, was unique and something that was unprecedented.
Indistinctness is my forte.
Only 2 decades after Turner's death, his paintings found a whole new group of devotees on the continent, the Impressionists, who were particularly taken with his later works that had once proved so controversial.
In terms of mindset, we can definitely see that Turner was a real precursor to the Impressionists. He was looking at natural effects, atmosphere, light effects, changing feelings during the day, shadow, darkness, light, how colour affects the renderings of what you're seeing. So it was really a similar approach, and it was definitely a precursor. And we know that some of the Impressionists would have seen his work.
It was Monet in particular who discovered Turner. Monet fled to London in 1870 because of the Franco-Prussian War. And during this period, he became interested in British artists, not surprisingly, and above all, Turner.
We know that he was heavily influenced by Turner as well as Whistler. Another artist, again, who was looking at the effect of light and colour and atmosphere at different times of the day. And this, obviously, with his series, became completely intrinsic to Monet's work.
Monet seemed to have really knuckled down and done quite a lot of work. I mean, there are a number of paintings that show London at the time, which are very exciting.
The direct influence on the emerging Impressionist movement is clear. However, some art historians have speculated that part of Turner's output could even be seen as expressionist.
He was capturing a moment, capturing the weather, capturing the feel of how it was to be in something. How much that was in his mind and expressing his own feelings, it's hard to tell, but he was definitely an expressionist in the terms of capturing what it felt like to be in that very moment.
There's quite a lot of angst and turmoil in there, literally, and he's obviously very, very interesting in replicating huge storms and big seas and that sort of clashing nature. Those are very expressive things.
Whether he was expressing a sort of internal world is hard to know. What we do know is that he was trying to express what it felt like to be there. He did work from his preparatory sketches onto larger canvases, but he was really trying to recall the atmosphere, the effects, everything that he was looking at around him when he was drawing.
In time, Turner attained the status of Britain's greatest ever painter. But in 1994, there was great fear that his full collection of works would forever remain incomplete, when Light and Colour, as well as its companion piece, Shade and Darkness, were stolen from the Kunsthalle Schön in Frankfurt. The two missing paintings were especially important, as they illustrated Turner's fascination with the writing of Goethe on the theory of colours.
Goethe's colour theory, which was quite new, was that he was looking at the sort of physiological effects of colour, how they affected your mood, how colour was perceived from the individual rather than the way that every eye sees colour. So he was challenging Newton, he was challenging theories that had gone before and really looking at colour through a different perspective.
Turner became increasingly interested in the effects of light on the landscape and the challenge of depicting it in paint. And interestingly enough, he titled some of his paintings after expressions that Goethe used.
The two paintings that were stolen from the Goethe exhibition in Frankfurt had been on loan from the Tate Gallery, London.
They're very important because they were part of the Turner bequest. So they're part of those paintings that Turner himself decided should be donated by him to the nation. So they were of the highest importance within Turner's work.
They were actually on loan to the gallery from the Tate, and the thieves broke in and they found themselves almost entrapped in the museum and ended up clambering over the guards essentially and getting out.
One of them was on the poster for the exhibition. So at one point I thought, well, did the thieves take it because it was publicised? It was just on the poster. It was very hard to know. And initially, we at the Tate were very much waiting. Was this going to be a political thing? Was somebody going to be coming up for a ransom demand in a very immediate sense, or using this as some kind of almost hostage taking? You don't know. One was thrown so completely, so far outside my experience, or actually any of our experience of those of us working at the Tate. I just didn't know what was going to happen next.
It would be 5 years since Sandy Nairn received his initial early morning phone call, and with the paintings still no closer to being found, it was feared that they might be lost forever.
I think in the first 5 years, it's fair to say that there certainly wasn't a day that went by without thinking about the Turner paintings, but I wasn't dealing with it all the time because there was nothing to deal with, and it was really only after 5 years that an opportunity came about. There was a lot of false leads, a lot of stuff came through. German lawyers would ring up saying, I think I've got somebody who might know something. That person might need a small fee to begin to start a conversation. None of it led to anything. But of course you kept hoping. The Frankfurt authorities had actually caught the thieves, but those thieves, once charged and convicted, had no information about the location of the paintings. And then once the authorities knew that the paintings had seemed to have been handed on to others, they allowed us to work. They gave a kind of special status to a particular German lawyer, Herr Liebrucks, and it was through him that there was just the possibility of, if a fee for information leading to recovery could be paid, then there was the possibility that the paintings might come back.
The paintings were insured for £24 million, which was paid to the Tate as a result of the disappearance. The Tate, however, decided that they would buy back the titles of the paintings from the insurance company in order for them to remain in their possession if they were ever recovered. This would prove pivotal, as Sandy would receive information which would take him back to Frankfurt in the hope of recovering one of the paintings.
I had with me the head of paintings conservation from the Tate, and actually we'd been about to leave. We were so fed up of nothing happening after days of waiting, and then eventually we got this call from Liebrucks saying, you should come now. And we went back into Frankfurt, went back to his office. There was the painting on the table, and it was fantastic. I mean, it was a completely joyous moment of thinking, after years, here was one of them. But of course it was only one, and then we had to work on the second.
The first painting to be recovered was Shade and Darkness in July 2000, but it would be another 2 years before Sandy would recapture the second.
I presumed that it would be another 6 months, that we'd get the second one, the same people. We had to keep it quiet. Eventually, we got new information. So then we set up another operation, December 2002, and we had the same amazing moment of being there again with head of painting conservation to check it. And there it was, without a scratch. out of the frame, no longer in the frame, but still on its stretcher, without a scratch. For me, there was huge relief to have spent 8.5 years and to know that these could go back on show as parts of the National Turner bequest, be available again to a proper public. That was what was so exciting.
The immediate feeling in the art world was great relief that the paintings had come back. They belonged to a public collection. They were a very important part of Turner's bequest. But very quickly, people realized that it could cause a dangerous precedent and might encourage thieves to steal from galleries. So there is that concern.
It was a question of saying, what was the Tate's duty? And in my view, and it was confirmed in law, that was the duty to get them back and to pay a fee for recovery.
The two paintings now reside back in their rightful home as property of the nation, just as Turner had wished. Despite their turbulent past, both works continue to be shared with other institutions around the world, allowing millions to enjoy the output of a true modern master.